Welcome to Spellbound Studio, everybody. My name is Tracy, and this is Fan Art Friday. Before we get into the video, please become a star in the Spellbound constellation by liking this video or subscribing to the channel. I put out at least 2 videos every week, sometimes 3 videos a week. For ways that you can further support Spellbound Studio, check the links in the description below. Major Kira Nerys and the Violence of Survival. Freedom Fighter, Terrorist, and the Price of Being Right. Major Kira Nerys is introduced to us as already a hardened woman. She does not arrive in Star Trek Deep Space Nine as an idealist or as a symbol. She comes to us as someone who has survived something prolonged, brutal, and intimate. Not a single catastrophe, but an occupation that lasted for decades. This occupation was not abstract. It was personal. It reached into kitchens and schools and childhoods. It taught children which walls could hide them and which uniforms meant death. Kira is often framed as angry, volatile, and difficult, and she is. But what Deep Space Nine is asking of us quietly and relentlessly is not if her anger is justified, but what it cost to survive long enough to carry that anger into peacetime. Kira is not simply a former resistance fighter. She is someone who was forced to decide again and again what kind of violence could be lived with. She is someone who crossed the lines not because she did not see them, but because the lines were erased by occupation. This is where Deep Space Nine did something that is rare, even in modern media. The show refused to cleanly separate freedom fighter from terrorist. It allows those categories to blur, overlap, and collapse under pressure. And it puts that collapse inside of a woman who was not redeemed by softness, and she is not punished for surviving. It is difficult to imagine Major Kira being written the same way today, not because she is unrealistic, but because she is morally unresolved in ways modern media often flinches from. Occupation, resistance, and the Bajoran wound. To understand Kira, we have to understand Bajor, not as a setting, but as a wound. The Cardassian occupation of Bajor lasted roughly 50 years. It involved forced labor camps, mass executions, religious suppression, environmental devastation, and the systematic stripping of cultural identity. This is not metaphorical background texture. It is the axis on which the entire series turns. Kira was born into this occupation. She did not experience a before. There is no innocence to return to. Her childhood memories are not of play, but of survival. Her formative years were shaped by the knowledge that obedience could still mean death, and resistance would almost certainly mean death. The Bajoran resistance was not unified. It was fragmented into cells. Each cell had different tactics, ethics, and thresholds. Some focused on sabotage, and some targeted infrastructure. And other cells assassinated collaborators. And other cells bombed civilians when the Cardassians were nearby. And Kira does not deny this. In episodes like Past Prologue, Season 1, Episode 3, we learn that Kira herself was involved in bombings that killed civilians, Bajorans included. She does not excuse this, she contextualizes it, and that's not the same thing. And that distinction is important, because Deep Space Nine does not frame the resistance as noble by default. It frames it as desperate. It shows us that resistance under occupation is not about purity. It is about leverage, and leverage in asymmetrical warfare is almost always ugly. This is not a mythic rebellion, it is a lived one. Past Prologue is one of the most important Kira episodes because it refuses to let her past be safely sealed away. The episode centers on Tana Loss, a former resistance leader who represents a version of the resistance Kira has outgrown, but she has not disowned it. Tana wants to continue violent action against Cardassians, even after the occupation has officially ended. He believes that peace is a lie and compromise is surrender. And what is striking is not that Kira disagrees with him, it's that she understands him. She does not argue from moral superiority. Her arguments are from exhaustion and experience. And Kira also has knowledge of what endless war does to a people who are already hollow. And yet, when confronted with evidence of her own past actions, Kira does not retreat into denial. She acknowledges that she crossed lines, that she did kill innocent people, and that she was part of something that cannot be neatly labeled as heroic. There is no cathartic confession or absolution. There is only recognition. And this is where the terrorist label becomes unstable. From a Cardassian perspective, Kira absolutely was a terrorist. She used violence to instill fear, and she targeted infrastructure. She destabilized authority. She made civilian life unsafe. But from the Bajoran perspective, she was a freedom fighter. But Deep Space Nine refuses to pick a label for her. And most importantly, it lets Kira live with that refusal. One of the most radical things that Deep Space Nine does is suggest that survival itself can deform morality. It does not corrupt or erase it, but it deforms it. Kira is not amoral. She does have a moral compass, but it was calibrated under conditions where ethical clarity was a luxury, where hesitation could kill an entire resistance cell, if mercy could be exploited. The innocent were already being murdered daily by an occupying force with overwhelming power. Under those conditions, morality becomes situational, not because people stop caring, but because caring has to be weaponized to mean anything at all. And this complicates the fantasy of righteous violence. Kira does not emerge from the occupation purified by suffering. She emerges scarred by it, and the show allows those scars to remain visible, even if they're not convenient. There is no moment where the narrative declares that it was all worth it, and that refusal is deliberate. Let's look at the same issue from a different angle. The label terrorist is not a moral category, it's a political one. It is applied by those with power to those who challenge it. Cardassia called the Bajoran resistance terrorist because that language justified annihilation. It framed genocide of the Bajoran people as security. But the Federation, often imagined as morally enlightened, does something even more subtle. It prefers the language of stability, order, and diplomacy. It is uncomfortable with Kira, not because she is violent, but because her violence does not fit their narrative of progress. And this is why Kira often clashes with Starfleet officers early in the series. Not because they are wrong, but because they have the luxury of being right. Kira's anger is disruptive because it exposes the cost of peace when peace arrives after devastation. She is not interested in being legible to outsiders. She is interested in not forgetting what it took to survive. In this sense, Kira is not a critique of resistance movements. She is a critique of post-conflict amnesia. And there's a kind of a cruelty in asking survivors to speak gently. A survivor should not be asked to tell their stories in ways that reassure listeners or to remove the parts that are uncomfortable. Survivors should have the space to explain what happened to them, not as a metaphor or trauma or misunderstanding, but simply stating fact. And Kira does not do this. She speaks like someone who knows that being understood is not the same thing as being forgiven. And forgiveness is never the point. It is difficult to imagine a modern franchise protagonist like Kira. Not because modern writers lack talent, but because contemporary media is deeply uncomfortable with unresolved moral violence, especially when embodied by women. Today's characters are often required to be either justified and sanitized or condemned and punished. But Kira is neither. She is not redeemed by softness, and she does not apologize for surviving. She is allowed to be abrasive, devout, politically inconvenient, and morally compromised without being narratively discarded. In modern media, a character like Kira would likely be soft. She would be a trauma trope. She would be reframed as misguided but well-meaning, or turn into a cautionary tale. But Deep Space Nine refused all of that. It allows Kira to be right and wrong at the same time. That kind of character requires trust in the audience. The writers and the creators of Deep Space Nine trusted that viewers can sit with discomfort without demanding closure. And between you and me, I think that this trust is more and more rare amongst, let's just say, television executives of today. But Major Kira Nerys is not a lesson. She is not an allegory meant to resolve debates about resistance, terrorism, or violence under occupation. She is a refusal to resolve them. Her story insists that survival under oppression produces choices that cannot be cleanly judged from safety. Violence leaves residue. The piece does not erase what it was built upon. Kira does not ask us to agree with everything that she did. She asks us to acknowledge that she did it to live. And that acknowledgement, that refusal to look away, is what makes her one of Star Trek's most enduring and uncomfortable characters. Alright, my stars, I really want to hear what you think about this. When violence is the only language an oppressor understands, who gets to decide when resistance has gone too far? Please leave your comments below. I look forward to reading them. Until next time, stay creative and stay spellbound.